get into it.
Yeah, let's get into
Perfect.
it.
Great. So I'm Chris.
I'm Isabella.
And
This is Bear.
That's Bear. Bear. It's been a complicated day for Bear. Bear was an assistant in a flavor wheel and cupping class. And both Isabella and I also doubled as baristas.
Yeah.
Busy day here.
Busy
at the
day.
Crown.
Bear's asking for a raise.
Well deserved. And so, okay, so this is Coffee's Sourced the Coffee podcast.
Yes.
I got it almost right the first time.
Yeah.
And we're here to talk about Frozen is the New Fresh, which is an article that you had published in the current issue of Roast magazine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Exciting.
Yeah, very exciting.
And it's just you on the byline.
It's just me, but there were many people involved. 2 other people. But yeah, really excited that the work is finally out in the world. We took about 6 months to a year to do all of the work on it and the research and the writing, and so it feels good to finally be released. And
a workshop based on the work got accepted at the Expo, the World of Coffee in San Diego.
Yeah.
So if you're in San Diego in April, you can actually come attend in person and get to taste what we're talking about, which is kind of exciting.
Yeah, very exciting. Yeah.
All right, well, let's start from the beginning.
Yeah, let's start from the beginning.
Why did we do this?
We tortured ourselves because the question came up a lot during one of our classes, and it was, is it good to like freeze roasted coffee? And my answer for a long time was always like, not outwardly snarky, but maybe like inwardly snarky, like no. But I mean, that's not like, I didn't really know the answer to that question. There's not really much research on it, and not super, fleshed out research. And so it kind of bugged me that I didn't quite know the answer. And so that's kind of what like brought us to this journey. And I guess we'll kind of get into like, the methodology of it. We had 2 different coffees, both from the same origin and from the same farmer, just 2 different processing types. So the experiment was based around, these 2 Peruvian coffees, one washed, one natural. And
From Finca Tosta, our friends Edith and Ivan Meza.
Yes.
Longtime collaborators in excellent coffee. Crown Jewel contenders annually.
Yes.
Excellent coffees.
And
Yeah. I mean, the big question was just like when and if we could tell a difference in frozen versus room temperature coffee. Right?
Yeah, we thought about, so we kind of did 3 different storage methods. We had our control, which was, your standard coffee that is in a one-way valve at room temp, allowing to rest over time. And then we had 2 frozen variables. We had one in a one-way valve bag and put it in the freezer. And then we had one that was frozen, vacuum sealed, and put in the freezer. And that, this research is really directed towards, consumers. We just thought what would be the most accessible forms for a consumer, because that's where this question came from, and that like those 2 variables were what we would determine were the best to evaluate.
Right. No deep freezer, no sophisticated storage methods.
Yeah.
Just like, how does coffee age in the freezer in normal conditions? So the freezer's, opened occasionally to get stuff out of it. And what else? We roasted in one big batch. So that everything was roasted at the same time, and then we split the storage into small, like less than 1 pound individually sealed packages. So that way we weren't opening up the seal every time we went to do a sample. So let me think here. We did a cadence of testing that was like, it started, we tasted right out of the roaster, like the day after, and then we tasted for about once a week for about a month, and then like once a month for about a year, give or take. Something like that, right? And we split our tastings into 2 different types. So one was triangulation. We were looking to see cupper accuracy. Could we tell a difference between the room temperature stored coffee and either of the freezer types. And then we did a descriptive cupping using the check all that apply boxes on the CVA cupping form to see if we could describe, using a limited set of descriptors, what the coffee tasted like. And so we did a lot of cupping.
We did a lot of cupping.
Got some bruised egos.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it was quite torturous the first week because it was double cupping for everything because we had one for each processing type. And we had 3 cuppers on the panel, which obviously is not ideal for, you know, a peer-reviewed article or anything like that, but it was what we had access to. And yeah, it's a lot of commitment to get, you know, other cuppers to come in with a really high frequency. So we did what we could with what we had. And
you know, to say that I don't think it invalidates our results. Like,
no.
It just wouldn't hold up to academic rigor or whatever.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I think there's a lot of takeaways that we can, you know, give some practical suggestions for roasters and people who are interested in storing roasted coffee for a while. Oh, shout out to Doris Garrido, our roaster, who was the 3rd cupping panelist also.
Yes.
Okay, so do you want to start with cupper accuracy?
Yes. So the data is pretty interesting. Up until 4 weeks, we have everything is under 60% or so roughly. And that basically indicates that we couldn't, with statistical significance, determine the difference between the variables and the control. And all of the cupping and was all of the triangulations were just the variables against the control. So it was, that's how we compared. We didn't compare the two. Could we tell a frozen vacuum sealed from a frozen one-way valve? It was always, can we tell the frozen variables against the control?
Right.
And we couldn't tell that up for the first 5 cuppings, which was at 4 weeks. And then...
I mean, that's kind of wild, right? Like, I totally expected us to be able to taste the coffee, a significant difference in the coffee that had been frozen almost immediately.
Yeah.
Based on, I don't know, traditional knowledge, anecdotal information. I just assumed that freezing the coffee would instantly degrade it.
Yeah.
And reliably, none of us experienced tasters, Doris is a Q grader, you know, couldn't tell a difference.
Yeah. Yeah, which was quite the experience. And then after the first 5 cuppings, we hit 2 months. And from there, throughout the rest of the period of time, we have statistical significance. We're in the, 80 to 90 range, roughly. So it really spikes after that month period mark, which that basically is saying that, the control is degrading enough for us to tell the difference between the frozen variables and the control.
Right. The staleness flavor of, roasted coffee was apparent in the room temperature sample starting at that, 2-month mark or so?
Exactly, yeah.
And it was strong enough that our cupper reliability went up and stayed up substantially.
Yeah.
For the rest of the study.
Yeah, at the 2-month mark, we had 100% on both the washed and the natural, which is kind of interesting. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess another note too is that overall percentage accuracy is a little bit higher in the washed. So that means that the washed degraded a little bit more, and the flavors were easier to distinguish between the frozen and the control variable, which compared to the natural where it's a little bit more difficult for us, just like the tiniest bit, but we can get into that a little bit more later too.
Okay, so in terms of what specifically changed in the flavors based on those check all that apply boxes, I thought was pretty interesting. We stacked basically, compiled all of our check boxes into the first 5 cuppings versus the last 5 cuppings. Mm-hmm. And there's some wild differences in some of these coffees.
Yeah. Yeah, so to start for the washed, wait, you said first 5 and last 5?
I forgot, because we also did stack the entire study against each other. So
yeah.
we did room temperature versus vac seal versus one-way valve in the freezer, which is where we start.
Yeah. So a couple of interesting notes about this one is, comparing them all together throughout the entire duration of the experiment. Musty and earthy are both present in the control, but not at all in either of the frozen variables. Brown sugar is substantially higher in both of the frozen samples compared to the control. Rough is also pretty high in the control compared to the frozen, one-way, and the vacuum sealed. And so basically that's saying is like we have, kind of these qualities that we associate with older roasted coffee present in the control, but not the frozen variables. And the fact that it doesn't show up, the earthy and the musty show up not at all or hardly at all in the frozen variables is pretty crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's kind of the benefit of the check all that apply versus, scoring a coffee, is that we have more data to track or it's easier to track data like this when we kind of have to, really be direct about what flavor notes that we're experiencing.
Yeah, it just helps to narrow the available descriptive flavors that we're able to use to make statistical significant discoveries and informed, opinions about what's happening in these coffees, as opposed to everyone kind of writing their own stuff and not really being able to knowingly define how that coffee changed or what the coffee's character was. Judgment-free zone at the moment regarding CVA versus the old CQI form. This just was a useful way for us to compile data. So,
we did this. Yeah, we did this way before any of the.
Controversy aside.
Yeah.
Okay, so the washed coffee control sample changed a lot between the first 5 and the last 5 groupings. A lot of papery, oily, vegetative flavors that didn't appear at all in the first 5 cuppings that did later in the testing. So, and the other thing that we noticed pretty consistently was that sweetness was kind of a factor in aging coffee as well. Yeah.
Definitely. And they showed up differently depending on the processing type. We found that, all of those sugary, brown sugar notes and dried fruit and things like that were a sign of flavor being preserved. And we see in the control that we have, a very high frequency of sweetness. And then it drops to nothing after the first 5 cuppings. And then, different flavor notes like cocoa is kind of all over the place. I feel like the intrinsic flavor of the coffee wasn't it was harder to track any trends between that.
Well, it's interesting that cocoa specifically as a note was preserved perfectly in both the frozen samples. Right?
Oh, yeah.
We have 15 occurrences both in the first 5 cuppings and again in the second 5 cuppings, but the control sample, cocoa drops from 16 in the first 5 to just 7 in the second 5.
No, yeah.
Sweetness also decreased in the frozen samples, just not at the complete down to 0 rating that the control sample had.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so frozen samples definitely changed over time, just not as quickly or dramatically, I guess, as the control sample.
Definitely.
Seems to be the takeaway there.
Yeah.
Okay, so what about the natural coffee?
So for the natural coffee, when we're comparing all 3 variables, we kind of see the same things present in the control and not at all or slim to none in the frozen variables, and that's earthy, musty, and paper notes. And kind of we use sweetness as an indicator here as well, but it looked a little bit different. Instead of brown sugar notes, we got, fruity notes, berry, brown, there was brown sugar, but definitely not as present. Fermented, dried fruit. And so when we're looking at the control, we see a drop in fruity flavors. We see an increase in mouth drying, musty, greenish notes, earthy flavors, oily, papery,
And it's worth noting that in the control sample, earthy, musty, and with one exception, papery, only show up in the control sample and not once in any of the frozen variables.
Yeah.
And most of those notes occurred later in the testing.
Yeah. And then we move to the frozen one-way valve. For the natural, we see an increase in some roasted notes, but we also weirdly see an increase in like berry and brown sugar in the last 5 cuppings. Cocoa stays roughly the same. Flavors like fruity, fermented, and dried fruit all drop off. But same with the, washed coffee, not in the same frequency or in a lesser frequency than the control.
So similar changes over time between the washed and the natural, just showing up in slightly different flavor categories for the most part. Curious about the increase like fruit berry notes in the frozen samples. That's kind of wild.
Yeah.
Unexpected. But generally speaking, overarchingly, the takeaway here is that the freezer did a good job of preserving quality initially to the degree that cuppers could not reliably tell the difference for the first 5 weeks of cupping. So if you're going to hang on to your coffee in whole bean form, then the freezer is a perfectly legitimate place to store it. And in fact, if you're going to be hanging onto that whole bean coffee for any length of time, especially longer than a couple of weeks, then the freezer is probably the optimal storage option.
Yeah.
It better preserved the flavors. The degradation was overall slower. So that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, definitely. I think another note on this too is in terms of, when we pulled the coffees out of the freezer, we would grind immediately after. We wouldn't wait for it to thaw at all. And there's actually some research that says that, colder coffee or, coffee with slightly higher humidity allows for more even particles, which allows for better extraction. So that was a variable that we didn't want to mess with, and we kept pretty consistent.
Yeah. That was an intentional choice, and we decided not to thaw the coffee, and it seemed like it worked well. We didn't test the thawed option. We don't know for sure if there would be a substantial drop-off in flavor if the coffee is allowed to thaw. But I guess based on what we saw from our methods, we recommend reinforcing that study, which is to just grind it straight out of the freezer.
Yeah. And also, too, it's like, this research was meant for consumers, and no consumers, maybe they would, but I imagine the average consumer is not going to thaw their coffee for a day before or like 8 hours before they...
You certainly could, but honestly, it's the path of least resistance, right?
Yeah.
It's like, this is the easiest thing to do. In some cases, the simple answer is the best one.
Totally.
Okay, so we felt like, definitive might be too strong of a word, but we felt like we came up with some pretty solid results, and ultimately concluded that we were very bad at triangulating for 4 weeks.
Yeah.
What else? I think, we are accustomed, you and me and Doris, to tasting very freshly roasted coffee.
Yeah.
So this is a variable that we were curious to test with people who maybe aren't professional coffee drinkers, So we've done this class for a small group of the public twice now, with a mix of coffee drinking enthusiasts, coffee sort of like prosumer home users, and then a couple of coffee professionals sprinkled in. It's an open mix, registration's open to anyone who wants to come. 2 groups of about, 15 or so? And I was pretty surprised and pleased to find that even the least experienced folks in the room tended to agree with us. They could tell a difference between the stale and the fresh coffees in a blind tasting. So that flavor of freshness of roast versus staleness of roast is apparent enough, even for an average coffee drinker, to tell. Which I felt like that was an important distinction to make. We didn't compile the data from that for the Roast Magazine article. That was just something that we kind of did on our own. But again, you can try it out for yourselves if you're in San Diego later this year.
Yeah.
I don't know. Is there any more data that we need to discuss from this?
One other note that I had was that in the cup, or the triangulation specifically, one of the things that was the easiest way, at least for me, that I remembered to tell the difference between the cups was the texture. Like oily notes were, really prominent for me personally in the older coffee. Yeah. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, totally. This was another one of those, like, if we had predicted in advance what we thought was going to happen, my idea would have been that the acidity would have been something that would have dropped off in staleness, but that wasn't the case. And so, like, as we began cupping through the triangles, it became apparent that trying to use acidity level or acidity type to distinguish between fresh and frozen wasn't meaningful enough. So it became more about mouthfeel.
Yeah.
And, eventually the staleness flavors became apparent enough that, I think that the flavor became an indicator as well. But initially, like that oily mouthfeel of the staler coffees was like an early indicator, which is interesting.
Yeah, like looking back, I wasn't like, yeah, that coffee was less sweet, and so therefore, I think that one's older. It was more of a textural experience. Yeah, I don't think I have anything else.
Well, after this study, none of us can drink stale coffee anymore. Too easy to recognize now that we're familiar with it.
He's kidding.
No, the one other thing that I wanted to ask you, Isabella, is you wrote a really heartfelt, very personal introduction to the story, which not all of which made the cut into the Roast Magazine article. And let me say, love Emily and Lily and, of course, Connie to death. They're great.
Yeah.
So easy to work with. They're so friendly to us, and they let us publish just about whatever we want. And some of this introduction that you wrote made it into the article, but I think we're going to publish like a alternate version on our blog that includes some more of like your story. And I was just like wondering if you wanted to like talk a little bit about that intro and like what inspired you to write that for a second.
Yeah. I, growing up, my grandmother would freeze coffee, and she always just was like, yeah, it keeps it fresher. And of course it's like ground coffee from like Folgers, and like probably doesn't matter if it's stale or not, because it probably already is. But yeah, it was, I grew up, my grandparents, my parents drank Folgers. When I got into coffee, I had the very, exquisite taste to be drinking Dunkin' Donuts. Quite the upgrade.
Fancy.
Yeah. Flavored Dunkin' Donuts if I was really feeling it. And then I started working in coffee, and, I feel like your taste and your like snottiness can like just exponentially increase in a very like short period. And in the introduction, I kind of, talk about how I'm like, drinking my like single origin espresso in like a cafe with floor to ceiling windows and like birch tables and things like that, and my Acme mug. And yeah, I don't know, there's just definitely like an element of this kind of like uppity behavior or thought towards different practices in coffee, and now I'm still guilty of it even now. And then it kind of like transitioned backwards, I felt like, once I started teaching, especially when there's like people that come in and they're so earnest and they're so curious, and you like want to have good answers to these questions that aren't taken over by, biases that you have because you worked at like a fancy coffee shop. And so, I don't know, it's just kind of this like, that intro was just kind of talking about how my personal experience of like being regrounded, I guess, in like the coffee realm. And, what may be like a very silly question is actually one that's like not well researched, and, there's not a definitive answer to it. And so that's what really like kind of inspired this work.
Yeah. So, you got questions like this, go out and get the answers, design a simple but effective way of testing. What else? I had the experience, I think, and have probably been guilty of perpetuating myths or legends or whatever for a long time too, that like as a young person being trained as a barista, I was told a bunch of stuff that I just took as gospel,
Yeah.
And ultimately some of those things don't hold up over time, and that's no particular individual's fault necessarily. I think it's a fault of an education system that's not really fully built out. Especially coffee is still pretty young, and we're learning a lot. And so I think that one of my goals as I've grown into a role as an educator has just been to really seek truth, and to make sure that I'm not, that I'm clear when I'm perpetuating an opinion versus a fact.
Yeah.
So, cool.
Yeah, this is our second time recording this, so if it feels a little all over the place, it's because it might be a little bit. But either way, thank you for listening. We hope that you read the article. Yeah. My name is on it, but Chris certainly contributed quite a portion. Quite a part of portion. My brain isn't working.
We're not going to edit any of this out.
That's fine. Chris contributed to the article. And so, thanks for sticking around and listening.
Yeah, for sure. We're going to try to breathe some new life into this podcast over the course of the next year, so you can expect some more guests and different topics. Once again, big thanks to Roast for publishing this. And that's it for me.
Yeah, I'm good.
All right. I'm good too. See you later.
See y'all.